Coming up next on Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable, the fight against a recent bill that eases restrictions on dark money in Arizona. That fight is over. And state auditors call for increased oversight on school voucher programs. The Journalists Roundtable is next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ted Simons. Joining us tonight, Jeremy Duda of the Arizona Capital Times, Bob Christie of the Associated Press, and Mike Sunnix of the Phoenix Business Journal. A campaign to refer Arizona's dark money bill to the November ballot is no more. Let's talk about this dark money bill, what it was all about, and what this initiative was all about.
Well, this bill, Senate Bill 1516, was a very wide-ranging, almost kind of omnibus bill sponsored by the Secretary of State's office that completely tore down and rewrote Arizona's campaign finance statutes. And I'd say about 95% of this is pretty non-controversial, but that last 5% was quite the sticking point, especially one provision that was widely viewed as very much decreasing the state's ability to enforce, campaign finance laws against dark money groups, mostly these 501c4 nonprofit groups that don't have to disclose their donors. There's not a lot of enforcement against them anyway. The state has very minimal ability to do so. But this said that under state law, if you spend more than half your money on campaigns, you're a committee. But this law said that if you're a nonprofit, as long as you have valid status with the IRS, no matter how much you spend, basically, as long as the IRS recognizes your nonprofit status, the state can't touch you.
It was seen as removing state control over anonymous political campaign donations.
No, absolutely, and that's what it was intended to do. It was intended to pull back the disclosure that these groups would have to give. And they didn't have to do a lot of disclosure anyway, but the argument has always been that if someone spends on to back a political initiative or to back a candidate in Arizona and they're an outside group, they should at least file with the Secretary of State's office so the public can know who's spending the money. I mean, it's all about, whose message is it? Is it the Koch brothers? Is it some union from some out-of-state union? Who is it? So that the voters can actually understand, okay, that message is coming from here. I can analyze it a little better and they can understand it.
Yeah, and so there was a citizens, and this was basically a drive among citizens to get enough signatures to get a "we don't want this kind of business" on the ballot. The drive's over. What happened?
Yeah, Ken Clark, a Democratic state lawmaker, was spearheading this, and he announced that they didn't have the money to pay petition gatherers to get the signatures to make the ballot. And there's a bunch of other progressive causes out there. Marijuana legalization, raising the minimum wage, limiting hospital pay CEO. You just had Prop 123, which folks on the left side of politics, were supportive of. So they were kind of tapped out. And so to get stuff on the ballot, you got to pay people to be able to collect those signatures and collect enough, and they just couldn't do it. And things have changed in this state. We were the state of clean elections, and we had all these good government things, and those have all been dismantled by various bills and court rulings, and we're going down a different path.
And this very much illustrates, how difficult it really is to get something on the ballot via citizen referendum. The signature requirement is lower than citizen initiatives and stuff like that, but you have such a short amount of time. You only have 3 months from after the end of the legislative session. They had to collect about 75,000 valid signatures, which means realistically you probably need close to 100 to make sure for all the ineligible ones. They collected 20,000. Ken Clark told me today, really about 16 once they weeded out ones they figured out were bad. And, I think they only got about $30,000, maybe a little more. They had very few resources, just not nearly enough to get it done. And we haven't seen an actual citizen referendum on the ballot since 1998.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, we had one that got on the ballot, got enough signatures a few years ago, but the legislature just repealed the law to keep that from happening.
Right, and that's the point. I mean, the point was, Arizona voters have a unique position in that if the legislature passes something and it creates enough of a furor, if they say you can't have more than 2 cats in your house and the cat people go crazy, you can go out and collect enough signatures, and as soon as you get them, that law's on hold. It does not go into effect until the voters of the state have the right to vote. And that's really critical. That's a Western United States. You don't see that back east. That's the only, out in the West we can do that. And that's happened just a couple of years ago with a big election bill, and it pulled it back. But this one just didn't get enough gumption. It how do you explain what dark money is and anonymous political spending, and
Yeah,
how to get people
that's a
fired
challenge.
up?
I mean, that's a challenge. I mean, the media, the inside baseball folks, political folks, especially on the left, talk about the Koch brothers and dark money. But if you get out there with real people, Main Street folks, they don't. It's hard to explain to them, engage, because it's essentially political money laundering and just moving money, pots of money around, and how much you have to disclose, and getting people that are engaged in a lot of other issues in an age of social media and everything that goes on there. It's been a challenge for the dark money foes to move these things forward.
With that in mind, obviously the legislature is not going to refer us to the ballot, stop us before we legislate again. So, I mean, will there be another effort down the road to try to get citizens to band together to stop this easing of dark money control?
Oh, I'm sure there will be. I mean, we saw a pretty serious effort earlier this year that kind of fizzled out over some fights over funding that would have required. I mean, we would have gone so much further than what this referendum would have done. Would have required the disclosure of the sources of all this dark money. That kind of imploded for kind of some random reasons. But I think there's no doubt we'll see more efforts down the road. This becomes such a big issue in the post-Citizens United world.
Yeah, the backer, Ken Clark, says, absolutely. I had 3 months. I didn't have any money. I couldn't get the big money people behind around the state to take this as a serious issue. But we're not going away. I mean, once people go through this next election cycle, through the primary coming up in August and then the presidential season, and they start seeing, who's running these ads and who are these groups and why can't I know? He's hoping that maybe some people will say this is bad for democracy.
And Democrats, this is a good issue for Democrats to gin up their base. They fundraise off this. They can point to conservatives and Republicans who've used the Koch brother types groups and point to them on ethics types things. And so it's a good email fundraiser. Whether they can get a thing on the ballot or certainly not get anything through the legislature is another question.
And in the end, the impact of this will probably be fairly minimal compared to the other dark money stuff, because this would have partially removed the state's ability to enforce some of these rules against these groups, but nobody's doing that anyway, no one at the state level and no one at the federal level. So the impact maybe not that big in the first place.
There were some dark money groups fined as well. Not much of a fine. I mean, it's, in the world of dark money, tens of thousands of dollars here and there doesn't seem to make much difference.
No, it doesn't, but it's a message. The Federal Election Commission fined several groups that have some connection with the Koch brothers for stuff they did several years ago. They said they didn't disclose that they spent. They should have filed with the Federal Election Commission that they were actually spending on political purposes. They didn't. And of course, the groups have lawyers and the FEC has lawyers, and 5 years down the road, we finally get a fine. Of course, the big point is that there's an Arizonan who has connected with those groups, Sean Noble, who was at one point very active national as a real backer of some of these Republican-leaning groups who pushed Republican issues across the country, and he was tied with these. So that's why we saw a lot of it in Arizona. But whether this is really a slap on the hand, I don't know. I mean, it's a small amount of money, and it's 6 years down the road.
Yeah,
so.
one of them got a $140,000 fine, the other $50,000, the other $43,000. Is that punitive for these kind of groups?
Well, I think some of the good government folks that want the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, to kind of crack down, see this at least as a good step, because that panel, which is made up of Republicans and Democrats, is often kind of frozen, and they don't have there's not a lot of teeth to it, and so maybe they're hopeful that going forward they'll go after some other groups and stuff. And obviously, folks here in Arizona see the ties between Sean Noble. He was chief of staff for Shadegg. He has had some ties to Governor Ducey in his campaigns. Hopefully shines some light on these things.
Yeah, and it's interesting is that Sean Noble and his group that gave the money to these three organizations, they didn't get any fines. There weren't really that many allegations against him, but it appears to be Sean Noble who inadvertently kind of caused this to happen, and that these groups, you don't have to disclose who they get their money from, but the FEC said they violated rules saying that if you explicitly take money that's already earmarked for campaign uses, that you have to say. They said, well, that wasn't the case. We didn't take it specifically for that. But in 2014, Sean Noble gave an interview to National Review, a conservative publication, talking about the way they distributed this money around in 2010 to go after Democrats who voted for Obamacare, a very successful endeavor. And it's talking about the way that we gave these groups this much money and gave these groups this much money. We made a spreadsheet of who we were going to target. And it was a fascinating article, actually, but this group in Washington read that and within a month or so, just filed off a big complaint to the FEC.
$233,000 article, apparently, as it
Yeah,
turns
I mean,
out.
really, if you think about
They got
that,
$25 million.
the amount of money in there, and it just shows, you obviously have citizens United and free speech rights that work against all this, but these are wise guys moving money around on both sides, both parties, both camps do this, and it's very hard for the regulators to track this down without some kind of a tip-off like that.
Speaking of moving money around, Prop 123 money is now going out to school districts, and the Arizona Republic had a big blowout story there showing that teachers not getting, a lot of teachers at least, not getting nearly as much as they thought they would.
Well, yeah, I mean, so they distributed about $280 million to all the school districts across the state to pay for 1.1 million school students around the country. It's $250, $260 per student. And a lot of teachers thought, a lot of folks thought, well, this is all going to go right into the classroom. Well, it didn't, because the schools have been shorted, for years. I mean, I talked to a finance director up in Flagstaff. He says, listen, the state gives me $900,000 a year for capital improvements, right? I have to pay for all the school books, all the textbooks, all my computers, and my software. My software for my computers, it cost me $2 million a year just for the licenses.
Holy smokes.
And so, yeah, they've been shorted, and the money that went to the school districts is not all going to the teachers. Some of it is. They're all trying to give 2, 3, 4% raises, but it works out to $20, $30, $40 a month.
Some of these districts, less than 20% of the money they're getting, this Prop 123 money that was supposed to go directly to the classroom, it's going to the teachers.
Well, sure. I mean, some of these teachers are getting 1%, 2% raises. Not very enticing for people who haven't gotten a raise in years and years and years, basically since the recession hit in 2008, 2009. And the governor's office, Governor Ducey was the chief backer of this, was promoting it all over the state. And they said, well, we always said these school boards, school districts, they get the discretion over how that's spent. But this really does look bad for them, because that was by far the biggest selling point. There's all these ads, all the social media said it's time our teachers got a raise, they deserve a raise, vote yes on 123. And for a lot of people, it's not really happening. Even for some of the folks where it is happening, it's pretty paltry.
Yeah, I mean, some of the school administrators, superintendents have gotten some raises out of this. And some districts, you've seen teachers getting $1,500 raises, $1,700 raises for a year. If you take it down to the pay period, it's like when you give the Humane Society, it's only $5 a day. So it looks bad. It's not what they promised and stuff. But the education lobby and some of their allies are already crying poverty, and this is probably setting the narrative for another ballot initiative to get more money.
With that in mind, what does the public do next time they hear that we need to spend more on education?
Well, I mean, if you're crafting the narrative, you say, well, okay, yeah, we give $3.5 billion to schools over 10 years, but we shorted them $10 billion over the last 10 years. So this is step one. The governor has said this is step one.
But we're still waiting for step two, aren't we? What is step two?
We don't know what step two is.
The ink isn't even dry on step one, right?
We don't know what step two is, and the governor hasn't said. The governor is working on ways to change the way the school funding formula works. It's incredibly complex. The worst part of my world is trying to figure out school funding in the state budget. And anybody who deals with it will tell you the same thing. It's highly complex. Are you rich? Are you poor? How much money do you get from property tax? It's highly complex.
I do think there's some political peril for the education folks to cry poverty on this so quickly. That barely passed. And this is a conservative state, and there's plenty of folks down at the legislature that noticed that result, how close it was. And for them to come out and immediately complain about this, there's folks in the state that are sympathetic to teachers, but there's a lot of private sector workers out there working in lower paying service jobs that don't get these kind of raises ever. And so they see this, and so politically it may work with the elites and the media, but it may not work as well with the electorate out there that was skeptical about 123.
Sure, and of course, one thing to keep in mind, this is just 1 year. This goes for 10 years. I mean, I could certainly anticipate that, based on all the blowback they're getting over the way they're using this, first year with the money, they come back next year, figure out how to use it. Maybe raises are a little higher on the agenda. Right now, as Bob mentioned, there's a lot of capital costs, and schools have been getting shorted on this for years. I remember they got shorted on it, pretty badly last year. So maybe you get some of that out of the way this year, and next year say, okay, well now it's time for bigger raises.
But the impact, if voters have to decide on whether it's an override or whether it's a state issue regarding education funding, does this come back to haunt them?
I mean, it certainly could. I mean, every year all these school districts go back and say, another bond on another override. Certainly there's a lot of voters who are going to be skeptical about that in the first place and might say, well, we just gave you $3.5 billion over the next decade. Why am I voting to increase my property taxes again for this?
Although the last time we had an election cycle, the vast majority, for the first time in years, the vast majority of bonds and overrides passed around the state. That tells you that voters are very concerned. They understood that the years of recession and belt-tightening at the state level has hurt schools. And I think they probably understand that one thing can't fill that hole. We'll have to see. I mean, it doesn't look good that the school district didn't immediately write a check from every penny that they got to pay their teachers, but they've also got air conditioners that are broken and school bus drivers that haven't got a raise or got paid as secretaries. And so it's got to be spread around.
All right, I want to move to this marijuana ballot measure because a lawsuit was filed on this regarding, whether or not this was a misleading measure to voters. And we can talk about other measures that are targets of lawsuits as well. But what's going on? The marijuana measure, what does it do, and why is it being targeted?
Yeah, there's a measure for November that would basically legalize marijuana for recreational use in Arizona. We'd follow the lead of Colorado, Washington State, Alaska, some of these other states. And these pro-legalization groups have collected a whole bunch of signatures. And so you got opponents in the business community, the Chamber of Commerce, Arizona Chamber of Commerce. You got Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery, Sheila Polk up in Yavapai, who oppose this thing. And they've filed a lawsuit. We've seen these things with other measures where everything's wrong with it, essentially. But one of their central arguments is the summary language that is in there, the 100 words that voters see. And when you sign the petition signatures, is misleading on what it would do. Because it's a broad measure. And so they do challenge it on a number of areas, including what it would do to DUI laws, it would favor people with dispensaries for medical marijuana, which is already legal already, and that brings in the gift clause of the Constitution. So they are kind of throwing spaghetti at the legal wall with this.
Sure, and this seems primarily kind of like a publicity and harassment attempt here. I mean, you have these 100-word descriptions mandated by law, and you have to describe everything an initiative does in that. And for some of these things, that can be pretty difficult, but you don't have to explain what it's going to do to every single Arizonan in the state. I mean, the lawsuit claimed even the title of the initiative is misleading because it says regulate marijuana like alcohol. They say, well, it's not being regulated exactly like alcohol. I think that's kind of getting beyond the point of this, but this is going to be a good opportunity, though, for them to kind of air their grievances, point out every negative effect they think it's going to have. But in terms of getting it off the ballot, I think those are pretty slim chances.
Right, and the point is, if you strongly oppose an initiative, and we'll talk about the other two initiatives that have also being challenged now, the first thing you try to do is keep it off the ballot in the first place. You try to prevent it from getting enough signatures, and we've seen efforts in other things where there's been accusations of pressure against signature gathering companies, don't take this contract. But once they do get the signatures, then you try to challenge it right there before it gets on the ballot. That's what this is all about. It's that 100-word description which talks about how it's going to legalize marijuana, it's going to tax it, it's going to use the money for schools. It didn't go down into the weeds and say, oh yeah, and it's going to change DUI laws because now that marijuana is legal. Obviously, you can't arrest everybody who smoked a joint 2 days ago. So it's going to change that. It's going to do some other things. And their argument is it didn't do that clear enough. Well, I doubt that's likely, but you throw it up against the law, they may win.
And you'll see similar challenges if it passes on all these things, just like they did with medical marijuana. The opponents will do these things to harass the implementation.
You mentioned a couple other measures real quickly that were being challenged as well.
Yeah, the other two initiatives that so far that made the ballot or that had enough signatures filed, one would cap hospital pay at $450,000 for executives, and that's pushed by a California union. There's a challenge against that, against the signatures. It was just filed late last night. I wrote about it today. And then the second one is the minimum wage initiative, which would raise Arizona's minimum wage to $12 an hour from $8.05 an hour now. Of course, we know California is going up to $15 pretty soon. This is another union-backed or Democratic, liberal-backed push to raise Arizona's minimum wage to up to $20,000 a year, which seems not very much, but that's what it would raise it to. And in fact, that's being challenged as well for the same thing because they're challenging the legitimacy of the petitions.
Right.
They're trying to keep it off the ballot now so they don't have to fight it later.
So these are basically pro forma type attacks. I mean, they basically get it earlier, get it often.
Well, for some of them, it's hard to say. I mean, there's so many regulations and law for like the format and process of these petitions and signatures, and that's what they're challenging. Two of these, the minimum wage and the hospital pay. The hospital pay, law says you have to have 15 lines for signatures on the page. They only had 12. You have to have a disclaimer at the top. They didn't have that, so they said, these are invalid now.
Right. And a few years ago, there was a Supreme Court decision that kept an initiative on the ballot. I believe it was the last marijuana initiative. That because the Supreme Court said it substantially complies with the law. And then the legislature a couple of years ago changed it and says no, strict compliance.
Right,
every
substantially
period
became
has
strict, yes.
Right, every period has to be in the right place. So now that gives the opponents the ability to go into the magnifying glass.
When you think about the people running these initiatives, they have to spend money on legal fees on all these things. That costs money, big money. And that's money they're not being able to spend on television ads and on mailers and stuff. And so there's a concerted effort. And in a lot of these cases, you have business interests and kind of folks on the right challenging these kind of progressive populist things like marijuana legalization or capping CEO pay for hospitals or raising the minimum wage. And so you have people that maybe have a little bit more money opposing these things traditionally, going against some more progressive folks. And it's robbing some of their resources to defend these things in court.
All right. Governor Ducey, to no one's, I think, surprise, has endorsed Senator John McCain in the GOP primary for United States Senator. Does this hurt his standing among the right wing of the Republican? I mean, he's a conservative, but Kelly Ward considers herself much more of a conservative than John McCain. And she's running against John McCain.
Maybe with some of them, but a lot of those folks probably were a little wary of Ducey in the first place. I mean, remember back to the 2014 election, obviously he won very handily as well, but the far right wing, the folks who are the most likely to be voting for Kelly Ward, they supported other candidates. I mean, they like most of what he does, but in the end, it's not going to. I don't think it's going to change too many people's opinion of him. I don't think it's going to change too many people's opinion of McCain. I mean, endorsements usually have very little impact. And I think the most significant thing about this is we've seen Ducey give out very few endorsements in contested Republican primaries. I think the only other people he's endorsed, this cycle are two county supervisors who I think have either effectively no or absolutely no opposition. McCain actually does have a kind of high-profile contested primary here.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, the governor. It would look really bad for the governor if he didn't endorse John McCain. I mean, John McCain is, I always call him America's senator. I mean, you go to any state in the United States and you ask a guy at the gas station, who's John McCain? And they all know. So, he's a former Republican presidential nominee. I mean, if for the head of the state party, who's Doug Ducey, to essentially the top elected leader, not to endorse the sitting Republican senator would be shock.
Especially after the last three Republican governors who preceded Ducey, very recently they put out an announcement that, Jane Hull, Fife Symington, and Jan Brewer had all endorsed him. So of course Ducey kind of naturally follows. But he's the sitting governor, so you got to give him his own press release.
It's interesting to see what all these Trump voters in the state do with this. Do they show up? Do they care whether Ducey endorsed McCain or not? Which Trump and him aren't exactly pals. Do they show up at all in an August 30th primary featuring Kelly Ward? I don't. They probably don't know her. How do they vote in November if it's McCain against Ann Kirkpatrick? Do they vote for Trump and then maybe leave that McCain thing empty? There's still anger out there amongst a lot of conservatives towards McCain. He's always had that kind of strife with some folks on the the Tea Party wing. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to see what the stuff with the Veterans Administration and just the continued problems there, if voters remember that. And conversely, all this stuff going on with Turkey and France and terrorism and ISIS, that traditionally has played in McCain's wheelhouse, but the world's changed. You don't see him out there quite as much.
Real quickly, I know you've been kind of following the Kelly Ward campaign to a certain degree. It looks like she recycled an old Romney ad against McCain. What's that all about?
Well, it's an ad that Romney ran against McCain when they were running against each other for the Republican nomination in 2008. Tying McCain to Hillary Clinton. Then as now the biggest boogeyman for the Republicans. Then they agree on this, they agree on this, they agree on this. They had a clip of Bill Clinton saying, "Oh yeah, they're very close." But at the end where it says, "Hi, I'm Mitt Romney and I approve this message," they cut that out and said, "Hi, I'm Kelly Ward and I approve this message." They put it on Facebook. The Romney folks then sent their lawyer, sent him a nastygram, told him to take it down. It's down now.
Yeah, what does that say about the war? I mean, is the war campaign, is it sputtering a bit here? Is it?
I mean, they're lacking in resources. They're not getting a lot of earned media. Frankly, this might actually help them. I mean, nobody saw that ad before the Republic pointed out that, hey, they just stole this old Mitt Romney ad. Now it's making national news and getting some attention. Nobody would have seen it otherwise.
This campaign's all about John McCain and whether there's enough Republicans in a primary to throw him out of there, and that obviously hasn't happened. It would be a big surprise, but at least you didn't run a George W. Bush ad against McCain back in South Carolina.
Not yet. Good to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. Monday on Arizona Horizon, a new poll commissioned by the Borderland Bureau at ASU's Cronkite School looks at how residents on both sides of the border feel about each other and a variety of immigration-related issues. That's Monday at 10 on Arizona Horizon. Tuesday, we look at the economic impact of nonprofits in Arizona. Wednesday, how Phoenix is now number 11 in the nation in a new report on tech talent. Thursday, we'll hear about SRP's effort. That's SRP's efforts to produce electricity out of forest biomass. And Friday, he said, it's another edition of the Journalists Roundtable. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great weekend.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.